The security forces in Sudan have reportedly opened live fire and tear gas at a group of pro-democracy demonstrators. You're looking at some of the scenes from earlier. These are people who've been flooding the streets again today, protesting against last month's military coup. At least 5 people were killed today and several wounded. Thousands of pro-democracy protesters rallied in the capital Khartoum to demand a return to civilian rule. Let's get an update on this. We're joined by Sudan International Relations expert, Abiol Lual Deng, who's joining us from Senegal, I believe. Abiol, grateful for your time. So you have been able, despite the disruptions with cell phone connectivity in Sudan, to get some word out. What are you hearing is the situation now?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for having me on the air. In fact, yes, I have been able to talk to people who are Sudanese activists who are based throughout the world, and we've gotten videos and information. As you said, there were major protests, not just in Khartoum, but throughout the country. So even in El Obeid, even in the center, in the east of the country, in Kassala, also in the west. So it's nationwide protests. Especially, this is a big, massive day of protest, 13 November, particularly given yesterday the current so-called self-deputized head of state, Al-Burhan, announcing a new governing council in which he excluded the previous civilian leaders, but included himself and Dagalo, who's also called Hemeti, who's the head of the Rapid Security Forces. And so what we've heard is that they opened live fire, that I've heard rumors 5 to 7 people were killed, hundreds of people were injured. I've seen videos. There's no way to authenticate them all. But, as someone who knows Khartoum, who knows Sudan, and, looking at the videos, a lot of them look pretty accurate to me. So I think it's chaos. There were very good reports that the government, the military already began to seal bridges and really get into a very kind of offensive standpoint with the civilian protesters, who are honestly peaceful protesters for the most part. Most of the issues going on alongside protests are not necessarily coming from the people who are behind the civilian. They're not coming from people who are behind civilian transition.
And we are, Abiol, broadcasting, as I speak to you, some of the videos that you have shared with us from your sources tonight. These hundreds, if not thousands, of people who've come out onto the streets of Khartoum, areas like Umdurman, and it is almost reminiscent, isn't it, of the scenes in 2019 coming up to the removal of President Omar al-Bashir. Yes, it began as a civilian-led movement, but the military swept in at the last moment and claimed that victory. How does this compare to you from that moment?
I think absolutely there is some similarity to that, but I would say, like, when Bashir was overthrown, there was a different mood. People were not afraid, but there was also a sense of jubilation. They were very happy to get rid of this, of Bashir, who had been there for 30 years. And also what was interesting at that movement and the original Sudanese revolution, you had a lot of different things going on. You had a lot of identifying with some of the words of, for example, Dr. John Garang de Mabior, the person who led the what is considered to be a southern movement, but the Sudan People Liberation Army and movement. A lot of people began to refer to what he talked about, looking into this pluralistic view of Sudan, a country in which it's a country for everybody. It's a civic nationalist country in which doesn't matter what ethnic group you are, it doesn't matter what religion you are, you're Sudanese. And Dr. John Garang de Mabior used to say, it doesn't matter, you cannot make this country an African country only, nor an Arab country only. And a lot of people in the revolution appropriated those phrases. They also began to see themselves as being part of the wider Horn of Africa and East Africa, began to talk about their links to Eritrea, Ethiopia, other countries. Now what we have people who are going back to kind of the traditional issues of the Sudan, in which we have a guy, Burhan. There's a lot of rumors that many of them have been verified, that he had to go to Egypt and get permission to do this coup d'etat, and that he is very close, and we know that just his own background, to GCC. He's close to certain Middle Eastern countries, and they have their own view of what they would like to happen in the Sudan. And so in many ways, the revolutionaries in the streets, these are young people, who are born, who are 20, 22 years old, like most Africans, they are quite young. And these are people who were born under Bashir and, not afraid of speaking out, and also never grew up in the Sudan kind of traditional hierarchy of ethnicity and stuff. They want to explore things. They want to change things. They're influenced by the Arab Spring, but they're influenced by Africa as well. And now we have coup d'etat of people who are coming back and, frankly, bringing back in a lot of the same things that Bashir had. And I don't think it's a hazard that the timing of this coup d'etat, because they were Burhan and Dagalo Hameti were supposed to, who's head of Rapid Support Forces, which is technically the Janjaweed, they were actually supposed to hand over power to civilians very shortly. And now they, sorry.
Abiol, pardon me. You mentioned the various interests. Yes, the international community is quite interested in what happens in Sudan, because when you look at the levels of poverty among the regular Sudanese, and you look at how rich the country is in natural resources, yes, the international community will be interested in that. But apart from the military issues, that is one of the calls from the people of Sudan to say they want a better life financially, economically. In 2019, it all began from issues, for example, to do with the bread prices, which were going up at the time.
Right. And you're completely right. And I think it's very important, to look into this kind of things. Any conflict is never just about ethnicity. There's also a lot of grievances that are economic. And in this situation, one of the things is that the Sudan always had bread subsidies because they were using the oil from South Sudan. So when South Sudan separated in 2011, that took 75% of the oil revenue of Sudan away from the country. And that was a source of hard currency. And that was also how the country was able to import wheat. So this kind of traditional bread subsidy began to disappear because of the separation of the country, which is something that was led by both economic, strategic, and also ethnic and other tensions. So actually, if you look at Sudan, you cannot delink the situation that you have now, even this revolution, from, in fact, this revolution was kind of bound to happen the moment that South Sudan left the country. Because, yeah.
Pardon me, as we sit here tonight, you've got pro-democracy protesters who are saying to the military, we want you to give back power to civilian rule. The military is saying, we're simply not going to do that. The coup was in the best interest of you, the civilians, and we'll only hand over power through an election, possibly, which they say will happen in 2023. We're in 2021 now, at the end of the year, yes. But who's got the power now to shift things to a position where both sides possibly could be appeased? Because it doesn't seem like either side is going to blink.
Okay, that's totally accurate. And I think the main thing, and what the people who are on the street, who are on the ground now would tell you, is that there is a desire, because it's the majority of Sudanese people are in the street and are asking for a return to civilian rule. The military is connected to very powerful interests, traditional, honestly, Arab world allied interests in Sudan. So actually, what it's going to take is the international community to keep insisting that it's not possible in 2021 for a military coup to happen in open daylight, like what we see happening in Sudan. I mean, Burhan actually said, well, I arrested the prime minister for his own safety. This kind of rhetoric that we thought in Africa we had gotten past. Maybe like what people are looking for is a return for full civilian rule. And the reality is that the timing of this coup d'etat is problematic because it was right around the time that they were supposed to talk about Bashir, maybe going to ICC and finally facing justice. And also about, the military talking about what happened in Khartoum in June 2019 when there was a massacre of civilian protesters. So the timing is suspicious. And also let's not ignore the amount of strategic interest worldwide and regional in the Port Sudan area, in the Nile River. I mean, we cannot also ignore the fact that Sudan is right now held under a self-appointed military leader at the moment that we see Ethiopia is also starting to, fall apart. And this is very dangerous for the stability of East Africa and the Horn of Africa.
Do you think the release from house arrest of the civilian prime minister, former prime minister now, Abdullah Hamdok would be a gesture that is welcomed by the civilians?
I mean, I think it's clear, but the thing is, I think with the civilians, people have gotten to a point in Sudan, like when you talk to them, there's no longer the kind of fear that there would have been like 20, 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, 15 years ago. People are like, no, we're never going to accept a military-led government. And so people are in the street and people are being shot. And this is really kind of a very extreme situation, because traditionally the military of Sudan is quite patriotic, maybe pro the people. And as you had mentioned, the economic situation also complicates things, because under Bashir, there was a privilege for people who were in the military. They had a certain level of social class. It also tended to concentrate around certain ethnic groups. And when you have civilian leaders who come in and kind of dismantle that, this presented a threat to the kind of social standing and status of some people, and we need to be honest. The reality is that also is a huge interest of Islamists, in this conflict, and many of them who do not agree with the idea that Sudan is pluralistic country, ethnic nationalist country. Hamdok ended a lot of the Sharia law era rules. Even went to a church during Christmas. And these kind of things. And there are people who don't agree with that. They want to ally Sudan with the interest of Muslim Brotherhood and Arab countries.
Let's leave it there. International relations expert on Sudan, Abiol Lual Deng, speaking to us about developments in Sudan tonight, where up to 7 people possibly have been killed as security forces open fire on pro-democracy demonstrators. Thank you, Abiol.
You're welcome.